So, welcome everybody who has just joined. We will wait just a couple of minutes for sort of other attendees to join the call. I think we're sort of slowly filling up in the chat. But just while we're waiting for some other people to join, just wanted to sort of kick things off today with a poll on your screen. We'd love to hear your thoughts, obviously. So the first poll question is, what is fundamental in developing an accessible workplace? So the answers here are HR's role, accessibility for candidates, recruiting strategies, and interviewing strategies. So if you'd like to pick that, we'll share the results soon enough once that's completed. Just another thing to add as well, we have the lovely Rachel, who is an interpreter from the British Sign Language as well, who you'll see on the call. So looks like we're starting to fill up a little bit more. Numbers are creeping up. So I'll give it just 30 more seconds, and then I think we will start to intro. Okay, so poll results are in. And so the poll results for what is fundamental in developing an accessible workplace is accessibility for candidates. So that's a nice thing to see, as it's going to be certainly a hot topic for us today is all around accessibility, as I'll share in one moment. So yeah, look, just wanted to say good morning, good afternoon or evening, folks, depending on where you are in the world. So welcome to the Soda Social live panel discussion titled Building an Accessible Workplace. So we have partnered for this panel discussion with our friends at Code Institute. And for those that are not aware, we're running a hackathon as well that's partnered with them in conjunction with this. So Code Institute are the world's first credit-rated coding bootcamp dedicated to producing career-ready developers. So we actually have some learners from Code Institute on this session, as well as the judges. So thank you everybody to be joining today. And this can be used as an additional resource to the hackathon and to the people that are joining that. So yeah, really looking forward to getting stuck in. And lastly, also welcome to our Soda Social community who are tuned in today as well. So today we will be rethinking accessibility and solutions to help a disability-friendly organization. So what you can expect from today is an hour of a panel discussion with a live Q&A at the end of the session. And then we do have a half-an-hour networking session as well for those that wish to continue the conversation further. So to introduce myself, my name is George and I'll be the chair and host for this webinar. So I work for Trust in Soda and Soda Social. And by day, I am a technical recruiter who specializes in the software engineering space. And so I have sort of seen firsthand how important it is for new products to be accessible and inclusive, and just how much clients really want that to be something that everybody's thinking of and is really important for a lot of people. So yeah, Soda Social, we aim to connect our network by discussing the relevant topics impacting our industry. And so at Soda Social, inclusion is the norm and not the exception. So we focus on social impact and inclusivity. Many people with sort of disabilities face significant difficulties in finding employment. However, technology has the ability to really sort of create an accessible solution. So small changes can be fundamental in making a difference and removing barriers to accessibility as well. So we'll be discussing solutions and helping to create a disability-friendly and accessible workplace that works for everybody. And so we want to make this discussion as engaging as possible. So if you have any questions for our panel throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask them in the side panel or in the Q&A section, and we'll get through as many as possible. So lastly, just before we kick things off, please note that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Soda Social YouTube channel, where you can access our upcoming webinars and podcasts as well. So firstly, I would love to introduce our fantastic panel, who are 4 amazing accessibility experts from industry-leading businesses. So we'd love to know more about our audience first. And so in the chat box, please do tell us what your #1 accessibility tip is And then I'll roll that question over to our panel as well, who, over to these folks. So if you could introduce yourself, your role, experience, and your number one accessibility tip. So let's start with Steve.
Right, Steve Demeter here, Google Engineering Management. I work in the Chrome OS org, in particular Project Borealis, which is an effort to bring Steam gaming to Chromebooks. Been in the gaming world for about 20 years now. Accessibility is always a big topic within that sphere. I guess my number one tip for accessibility would be, leverage your accommodations team. They are there for you. They exist and are waiting to hear from you. I think the one thing I keep hearing from other engineering managers or managers that I manage is, they don't know to reach out. They don't know what's there. They're afraid to ask. No, they will have answers for you. So make use of it, please.
Lovely. Thank you for the intro, Steve. And yeah, great to have you here. And next up, I'd like to hand over to Jessie, please.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here, and as always, in an event with Soda. So I'm Jessie Ellison. I'm engineering manager at Ecosia. We are a search engine that uses up to 80% of our profit to plant trees. And we're really, it's very important for us to have an impact on the communities where we are implanted, and obviously for our employees as well. I've been engineering manager for 1.5 years now. I'm also specialized in D&I. And yeah, regarding the number one tips regarding accessibility, I would say first and foremost, talk to your employee and ask what they need, because you can always trust them to know better what they need to be successful in their work. So ask them, and obviously not just ask them, make action out of their requests.
Lovely. No, I agree with you, Jessie. Communication would probably be the top one for me as well. Yeah, thank you very much, and good to have you here as well, Jessie. And next, I'd like to go to Toby.
Thanks, George. Hey, everyone. So I'm Toby. I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant, the author of the Inclusive Growth book and the Inclusive Growth Show, which is a podcast on all of the usual platforms. I work with heads of HR and senior business leaders to help them create their diversity and inclusion strategies. My top accessibility tip would be that if you are a product owner, head of user experience and design, an engineer, or a content author, you first of all need to create a baseline to understand what accessibility problems you have with your product. So you can do that through an audit, you can do that through usability testing with disabled people or older users, and then make sure that you supplement that with training so that your team are really skilled at producing accessible digital products.
Fantastic. No, really appreciate it, Toby, and yeah, agree with every word. Thank you very much. And last but not least, over to Mr. Brian O'Grady.
Hi guys, it's a pleasure to be here. I have to admit, Brian O'Grady is my name, and I'm the program director at Code Institute. I've been involved in either software development or education the last over 25 years, and really I'm an exalted company, and even Toby's title as diversity inclusion architect is quite intimidating. And I was thinking, what can I say that's authentic, without the volume, the level of experience? And I was thinking, what do we do? Well, what's the tip? Well, champion human beings. If you start there, I was thinking, well, if you champion humans, everything extends from that. And the empathy that comes with that is trying to understand anyone's situation. In the workplace, you spend more time with the people you work with than the people you love or live with. So let's make that a positive experience. People are giving you their time. So you try and honor that. And then by doing that, in my area, we create learning content that becomes the ingredients of what we do, and it gets baked into our learning content. So really it is, you know, at the possibility of sounding cliched, but, you know, champion human beings. That's the point of, that's your rock, and go from there. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's a great intro, Brian. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our panelists. Some great introductions and some great insight as well. So yeah, I think I'd like to jump straight into the questions, and you know, for our audience to see some of the intelligence from our panel, and yeah, to get engaged with these questions. So the first question I do have, I'd like to throw this one out to Brian. So a quick stat before I go to the question, but so the Labour Force Survey, the LFS in 2019, their data revealed that disabled people were over a third less likely to be employed than non-disabled people. So with an employment rate for disabled people aged 16 to 64 of 53.2% in 2019, compared with 81.8% for non-disabled. And so, Brian, what would you say are the biggest barriers holding back individuals with physical disabilities in the workplace?
Well, I said we're learning our way through this, and I suppose the obvious ones for me, oh, my apologies, would be physical location, and then there's cultural aspects as well. You know, Steve there talked about your accommodations team. You know, I'd love if our team was large enough to have an accommodations team. Not all companies can be that big, and it's fantastic that you have that. You know, you may be at the mercy of the physical location that you're in, because you're a startup and so on. But there's certain things so it's the physical barriers, you know, access and so on, but also the cultural barriers as well, whether they're attitudes or whether it's organizational and so on. So really, it comes back to being curious, finding out about the disabilities that might exist, or what makes equity, as opposed to looking at it from disabilities. What makes equity? Finding out what makes that. You're always looking for that balance. But yeah, look, wherever possible, if you're in a stage of growth in your own company or own organization, that you can deal with physical barriers to get in, then by all means do that. But you can also, it's cultural and attitudinal as well. You know, we are, one of the positive things about the pandemic really is remote work is being almost universally accepted now. So mobility issues can be resolved there, but at the same time, we should look after the home needs of those who are working there, or for working from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's something that's obviously really sort of quite current with, you know, pretty much everybody, you know, being at home at the moment as well. So a lot of people might forget that as well when accommodating for people that aren't going to be coming into the office as much. I'll throw the question out as well to anybody else on the panel around that. You know, really is, you know, what are the biggest sort of barriers holding back sort of individuals with sort of physical disabilities in the workplace? If anybody has any thoughts.
I would like also to jump on that question, because there is also a fact which is not necessarily just linked to a physical disability, but simply 80% of general population have an higher degree. I'm talking about tech because this is my area. 18% of non-disabled people have a higher degree, and only 6% of people, disabled people, hold a degree. And one of the biggest barrier to access to work, at least in technology, for example, is companies who are expecting a high degree to be able to apply. That's remove a lot of workforce of people that go, for example, to Quad Institute to learn a new by themselves this type of knowledge. So I would say, to jump off on what Brian was saying on culture, there is also this part of culture that we also need to work on, how we address knowledge and capabilities just based on diploma, when there is other way to gain knowledge, which are not always linked to high diploma. And this is, in my opinion, one of the high barrier to access some jobs in our market today.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Yeah, I agree with that. It's yeah, but very valid point you raised, and thank you very much. So to move on to my second question, and so I found another interesting stat. I found lots of interesting stats when learning about accessibility in the build up to this, which has been quite fun. But I found that 70% of disabilities are hidden, according to Verdict in 2019. So a question I'd like to pose to Steve is, what would you say the hidden challenges of invisible disabilities are in the workplace?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I think not to take it a step down about the challenges people with physical disabilities face, but the idea of being deaf per se is not something that is going to be readily apparent to the majority of people there in the room. And I, in preparation for this talk, I interviewed numerous deaf people, hearing about the challenges they face of having to speak up, being ignored, having to speak up again, only at the point where the point of contact was tired of hearing from them did they take action and accommodate. And that's a mental block, right? That's like the last thing you want to face, having to talk about your disability and bring it up and then insisting about it when you just don't feel heard. I think that this is something we need to get through. There is equal attention needs to be put on disabilities like this so that there's a space to be heard just alongside physical disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. It's an important factor that a lot of people don't sort of factor in. It is the invisible disability side of things, because you can't see it, you don't always know it's there. But no, yeah, thank you very much, Steve, for your input. And I'd like to again sort of throw the question out if anybody else has any thoughts on that at all.
I'd really like to hear Steve. When we met there recently, a few weeks ago, Steve brought some really interesting points. I'd love to hear more about, neurodivergent versus neurotypical disability and how that can be. We spoke about it. We see that as a superpower, really, for certain team members and students as well.
Yeah, my own personal history is that I was diagnosed autistic a while back, and man, that diagnosis was a lot to hear at first, right? But also it kind of cleared a lot of things up that I'd been, I think, putting on myself, blaming myself for, wondering why I was on the outside of things all these years. It kind of gave a framework for me to, I think, operate within and stand on the shoulders of giants who'd come before me and worked through their own challenges in terms of being reached by other people, having a leg up, being understood in both personal contexts as well as professional. But again, it's a invisible disability. It's not something that people are really going to see unless I bring it up. I'm pretty, high functioning, so it's not something that I think is really apparent, but it's something I put out there, and I really don't have any qualms about that. I think it's information, like anything else. So normalizing it, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
There is also, more generally, I think what you were saying, Brian, at the beginning, which was we need to focus on the human being. I think just normalizing that everyone has different type of abilities and not question every time someone is asking for an adaptation, and just accept that from anyone without having to ask for, do you have a diagnosis, an official diagnosis? Show me your paper, show me your doctor notes, and just accepting that anyone can come and adapt to them so they can thrive in your workplace would already help, because I totally relate with the fact that you getting this type of diagnosis or not wanting to share that you receive this type of diagnosis, that makes it even more invisible to others. So you don't want necessarily to go to your employer and say, well, I'm X, and I would like this type of accommodation. You should be able to just come to your employer and say, I will need this accommodation because it will help me to be more performant. And the fact that in some companies, we have tendency to look at employees are kids that might lie and will just try to get. That's a major problem, because if we would not have this type of philosophy, maybe everyone could just come without having to share private health information to be able to work properly. And with that, it's obviously we're talking about neurodivergence, deaf. There is also chronic illness when it happened that you will have to go to the hospital several times, but it's not visible for others that you're sick. How do you make that work inside the workplace? As manager, what I try to focus on the outcome. If you tell me, I trust you, if you tell me that you will need that much time to do your work, if you're away for 2 days because reasons, I should not have to ask, and you should not have to tell me why. And I think this is very important. I used to be very, very sick when I started work, and I got called in the HR room, and the HR person told me, hey, that would be nice if you would stop to be sick and just come more often to the work. That was awful for me. And I was the most performant person of my team despite that. So that's why for me, this is very important to put the focus on the outcome, because I think that's what is the most important at the end of the day. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with you there, Jesse. It's often employers have it the wrong way, really. I think it's about sort of making that change internally at companies. I've seen from a comment or two actually in the sort of the comment section that somebody said they have to sort of prove and reaffirm that an individual is disabled at their workplace, and this person has said that it's something that I have to go to monthly meetings to prove that I still need the support, and it just should not happen. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that people that work in companies that are fine with it and understand it, they don't realize there are still companies out there that aren't as aware of this. So no, it's some really good points you've raised there as well. And so, a question I wanted to raise to Toby for this one. And what I found as well is that not everyone identifies with the term disability. So it can be more helpful to ask about their accessibility needs or adjustments they need. And this helps to determine your disability representation and how best to support the needs of your disabled employees. And one thing as well is sort of even moving away from the term disabled, and it's something that was new to me actually, is the term differently abled. And I know Toby and I spoke about this before, but wanted to get his thoughts on it. Is the difference between disabled and using differently abled? What is the thoughts on that, and what is it people should be using?
Yes, I mean, language is really important, and using the right language can make somebody feel like they belong or they don't belong to a team or an organization. And what's very often discussed in the disability world is whether we should use person first language, i.e. a person or somebody with a disability, rather than using, say, disabled person. And I think there's arguments for both. My personal opinion, and I was born with a rare neuromuscular disability. I use an electric wheelchair and I need 24-hour care. Is that I personally don't mind being referred to as a disabled person. And I will often say that I'm a disabled person when I'm speaking to others, but I do have friends and colleagues who don't like that. They would prefer to say I am somebody with a disability. So I think when you're working with a colleague or you're a manager, it's important to have a conversation with somebody about what language they like to use. It's the same conversation that you might want to have with somebody who's, say, from an ethnic minority background as well, about what is the kind of preferred language, or somebody you might want to have a conversation around their pronouns, So it's a similar conversation with everybody. You were mentioning about differently abled. Again, this is my personal opinion, is that I personally don't like using the term differently abled. I think what it does is it really diminishes disability. It's a way of kind of skirting around the topic of disability, where perhaps we need to have those conversations head on around disability and the barriers that people face in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, which is a reason I think we spoke before, wasn't it, Toby? I wanted to get clarity on that, because for somebody that wasn't aware of it, I now know that the best term is a disability.
Yeah.
And just sort of off the back of that question as well, to be fair, Toby, I'll keep it with yourself, is with recruitment in mind, how can businesses ensure an inclusive and accessible recruitment process?
Yeah, so this is a really practical answer. What you need to do is map out your recruitment process from beginning to end, so you understand what the individual steps are and the kind of the junction between those steps. And I mean, to kind of steal what Steve says, you need to build empathy by understanding what it's like to go through that particular process with various impairments. So, what would it be like for somebody who's autistic to go through your recruitment process? What would it be like for somebody who's got a visual impairment, a hearing impairment, a physical impairment to go through your recruitment process? And essentially, what are the speed humps or the roadblocks that are slowing people down or preventing people from completing that process? So if you insist on doing face-to-face interviews, that might be difficult for some autistic people, for instance. If people have to upload a CV to your website, but your website doesn't work with screen readers, then somebody who's blind or partially sighted is going to struggle to upload their CV. So you have to, map out the process and then walk through that process, wearing obvious different hats to understand what the obstacles are.
Yeah, for sure. And from somebody in that, who is a recruiter and works in these processes, you find that lots of people need different processes set up in every different occasion. And I had a really great story. A colleague of mine in our sister brand, Broadgate Search, had somebody who was autistic that they were representing for a client, and found that they did struggle when they went to meet them in person. And ultimately, they found some different arrangements with the client, and that person ended up getting the job because they did video calls or went alongside with them and sat in the interview with them. And so it's creating that awareness around it, isn't it, really? And understanding and people listening to it that really is going to ultimately benefit the people involved. So no, some really good points, and thank you very much, Toby. And one question I had as well was, sort of whilst access to support workers and other disability services has been lost during the pandemic, obviously new initiatives have been launched and forced sort of organisations to use more accessible tools such as Zoom, Microsoft Teams, with organisations like Twitter, whose employees are now working fully remotely. A question I'll throw out to the whole panel is, how can accessibility be part of the plan and not just as an afterthought?
I think you're right, George. Like, technology plays a really important part for disability inclusion. I think it's important, particularly in the last 18 months to 2 years, that companies think very seriously about the tools that they're using. Obviously, a lot of teams are working remotely and now relying on systems like Zoom or Google Meet or Slack, or the list is endless, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that an employer thinks very carefully about what tools they're selecting, because some tools are better than others when it comes to accessibility. So for example, I run my own business off of the Google workplace platform. One of the reasons why I chose Google was that Google Meets has subtitles built in. So very, very easily I can click a button and subtitles magically appear. However, you can only get subtitles on Zoom if you integrate with another system, and it's quite hard to do that integration, and it's an additional cost. So I don't think that's an incentive for people to use subtitles. And the thing is, subtitles don't just benefit people who perhaps are deaf or hard of hearing. It can benefit people who maybe English is their second language, or if they're working in a noisy background, or they have forgotten their headphones. So, accessibility actually is not just about making life easier for disabled people. It helps a lot, a lot more people as well.
For sure. And yeah, no, some interesting points. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Google Meet as well. It's yeah, to be honest, I didn't know you could get subtitles that quickly. It's a functionality I'll be testing out for sure. Some homework for after this. But was there anybody else that had any thoughts on that?
No, I was just going to agree with that. We use Google for our communication suite, and I often use the subtitles myself if there's a bit of noise, background noise going on. Sometimes I try to learn a different language by switching it for fun. See if I can learn French while someone's speaking to me. But I'm being facetious there, but it is a very powerful tool. And the other thing as well is that I just kind of bring it back to neurodiverse disabilities, or as again we call the superpowers. Some we find, software that we used to say, like for years, that software development was a fantastic haven for the chronically shy. And there was a time we didn't know really what that meant at the time, but really is a way of communicating with some people may only be comfortable communicating via text, for example. So one of the things we do is like openly embrace the freedom to have audio only when communicating as well. It doesn't have to be video on, because it can be very stressful for people and very anxious. So embrace that as well. It doesn't, not everybody has to be seen all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Oh, George, no?
Yeah, go for it, Steve.
Not that I'm going to toot my own horn working for Google. I appreciate the kind words about subtitles. I had the pleasure of working with the captions team last year a little bit on a video player feature. Such a cool experience. So many assumptions we went in with, not even realizing they were assumptions, such as we wanted to put captions on, like we wanted to have an opportunity to put captions on both the top and the bottom of the screen. They were like, no, there's a standard for putting captions towards the bottom of the screen and other things like this. But the interesting thing was, it wasn't just textbook rhetoric they were giving us. They were deaf members of the team who were there, who crystal clear explained the first-hand experience of what this is like for them in practice, not only being an employee, but from their own personal context. It just made it that much easier to work with and accommodate them. So my 2 cents.
Cool.
No, for sure. And no, oh, sorry, Jessie, please continue.
Yeah, we were talking about all going all remote, etc. I also see right now a tendency for some company to want to go back in the workplace, and I just want to give a reminder to anyone who will be listening that don't strip away all the advantages that disabled people gain with the switch to remote work. Like the hybrid situation is nice to give the flexibility, but remember that you still have some people who might benefit from always having a video call and not just being in person or having the transcript, etc. It's not because some of you are in the workplace together that it removes suddenly the disability or the advantage that it gave to other of your employees. So that's just a reminder I wanted to give as well, because we talked about companies that went totally online, but now we have also companies who are hybrid, and this, as I saw that it has tendency to remove some of the advantages that we gained, and that would be a shame.
Yeah,
For sure, for sure. And what are your preferences for the panel? Is everybody going to return to work soon, or is everybody enjoying working fully remotely?
Well, I work from home anyway, so I will continue to do that. But I work with a lot of clients who are thinking right now about what their kind of new working arrangements are, and I think a lot of people are going for hybrid arrangements, working from home and the office. But I think the clients that seem to be getting it right is giving people or empowering people to make their own choices. So they're not mandating when people should go into the office or where people should work. They're focusing on outputs. But I think a word of caution, what I'm learning with my clients is that we're starting to see distance bias creep back in. So, people that do want to work from home could be left out of the loop on important information and decision making and career progression opportunities. So it's really important for employers to make sure that everybody, regardless of where they work, has equal access to promotion opportunities, getting onto those cool projects, getting those client-facing opportunities and things like that.
For sure. And I think it is down to sort of the preference of the person. And as you said, the output, if somebody's doing just as well, if not better at home, then why not? It's going to benefit the business.
And from a disability perspective, there may be some disabled staff who find it easier to work from home because they don't have to do the commute. Like when I work, I used to work in the city for Deloitte, and for me to get to the office from my flat in London, I couldn't go by public transport because it wasn't wheelchair accessible. Luckily in the UK, the government has a financial grant called Access to Work, which helps pay towards travel costs. So that covered taxi fares to and from work. So from a disability perspective, I think it's really important to make sure that you continue to offer flexibility so that you can keep disabled people employed.
For sure. And something just off the sort of the back of that, Toby, as well, links into the next question nicely, is a recent stat that I found, excuse me, was that businesses lose money from disabled customers due to sort of inaccessible websites and products. And so what sort of recent research has shown is that 7 in 10 disabled customers said that they'll click away from a website that they find difficult to use. And that means 4 million people abandoned a retail website because of the barriers, which was an estimated loss of £11.75 billion from the click away pound. And in 2019, the click away pound has grown to £17.1 billion. And so the question I had really in tie with sort of ensuring that things are accessible is really what are the challenges and also the opportunities around sort of digital accessibility? That's a question for everybody.
Yeah. So I like to focus on 4 things when it comes to digital accessibility. And there was a comment earlier from somebody, it was a bit further up in the chat, basically saying that they're trying to champion accessibility, but they're told by their manager that they just don't have enough time, or the budget's not there, or they don't have the users. 20%, there's about 20% of the population who have a disability or long-term health condition. That increases to 40% if you then include friends and relatives, of those people. So there definitely are the people out there that have accessibility requirements. And the 4 business cases are, first of all, there's the legal case. If you're not accessible, you run the very real risk of being sued. And the way that legislation works in the US particularly is that there's a number of ambulance chaser law firms out there, and they will write you a letter and they will say, your website's not accessible. You can either pay us a lot of money to go away, or we can take you to court. Either way, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So there's the legal case. You're right, George, the financial case. If people cannot complete a purchase, that's money that you're leaving on the table. If you're forcing a user to have to go into a branch because they cannot do a transaction online, again, that's going to cost your business money. So if, for example, somebody can't complete a mortgage application online, but they have to go into the branch, that will cost more money. But there's the ethical business case. If you say as a business that that diversity and inclusion is important to you, and you do lots of sponsorship and a lot of comms around that, but then your website is not accessible, then you're not being congruent with what you're saying. And then finally, which is probably the more exciting one, is just the innovation case. If you involve disabled people in your research and development, if you involve disabled people in your usability testing, there's so much innovation that can come from that. My ex-boss at the BBC created 3D sound to help, like an app to help blind children learn advanced mathematics. That technology was then picked up by a gaming company for an app to help people run away from zombies. It was an app to help people run. If you're running, you can't be looking at your phone screen at the same time, so you're relying on sound. So yes, that technology was an innovation from something that was created for blind children.
Wow, that's super cool to hear, and the way it's sort of gone sort of down further and further down the line to then turn into a game. And yeah, it's some impressive stuff. And just that last question we did have as well around sort of digital accessibility and the opportunities there. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I really love everything that to be said. I wanted also to jump on the innovation part, because all of the thing that's shortcuts, what you were saying earlier, to be with the captions that are everyone benefits from this. It makes life of everyone else easier. So when we invest on underrepresented and underserved group, everyone benefit of it, and especially when it's around disability. So there is all gain for everyone. It's like, it's not just a niche investment, it's something that's benefit literally everyone. So that should be one of the priority we should have, in my opinion.
Yeah, and as part of our full stack software development program, we try to get our students to the level of AA accessibility, and they're assessed as part of that as well. And we try and instill the importance of that earlier as well, for text alternatives, contrast, and so on, and make students aware of it. It's part of the user experience. It's not just structural constructs in terms of putting websites together. But another shout out for Google is what we found is a fantastic tool for our students is the Lighthouse functionality that comes with Chrome developer tools. It's a way of doing an audit, and we make our students, on a 12-month program, our students are aware of that from literally a few weeks in. So at least we're trying to make our graduates cognizant of that before they ever even graduate, of the importance of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, folks, in terms of the questions I have for you, I think my time is up. We're a minute over into our time for Q&A questions. And so, yeah, just I think for the next part, really just wanted to lead in firstly to a poll question. And I think the first poll that we do have on there is, do you feel you belong at your current company? And I think somebody in the background, there we go, the poll is there. And so, yeah, feel free to answer that question. I'll read it again for anybody that might be slightly harder of hearing. Do you feel that you belong at your current company? And the answers are agree, disagree, neither agree or disagree. So we'll give it a moment and wait for the results to come back in, and then I can share them with the group. But yeah, just to sort of to reflect on that, some really interesting and almost sort of like motivational points, I think, for myself certainly, to go away and learn even more again on the topic. And yeah, just thanks again for everybody's answering my questions. Certainly, we're now on to the point of answering some other questions. So just to say to all participants on this call, if there are any questions you do have for the panel, then please feel free to ask in our Q&A box, and also you can ask questions in the chat as well. So so we have a poll result in, and do you feel that you belong at your current company? So we've got 49% that have said that they do, some disagree and so obviously do not feel, and then some neither agree or disagree. So I feel as though maybe something off the back of that might be for certain people that maybe don't agree with that, and feel free to put your thoughts into the chat as well. Maybe we can open a conversation on that. But yeah, certainly I think that maybe it might be worth a conversation. And if you're feeling like maybe you don't sort of feel as comfortable at your company, have that conversation as the panel have said, or create a bit of noise around that, and see where that sort of gets you, and hopefully you'll have more of an outcome, or sort of more care from there. But just to sort of jump into questions now, I can see sort of one or two here. So I think there was one for Toby, but I believe he's gone back and answered. So a question from Lucy. So she said, bear with me, says, while accessibility is for candidates is number one, as we've seen from the polling, what recruiting strategies need to be in place or improved to make accessibility easier? She said, I feel like the two go two in hand. I'll open that to everybody.
I feel like Toby already answered that with the mapping out your recruitment process. So I would just advise to go back to that and try to put yourself in the feet of someone with a disability on any kind, and try to redo your process and see where you need improvements. That's definitely the best. That's definitely the best recruiting strategy that will help first to make your recruitment process accessible. What we are also trying at Ecosia is also to reach out directly to communities, because maybe the main job boards are not the most accessible either. So going directly to communities and trying to, that's a reason we call them underserved. It's because they don't get the same access. We are talking about accessibility. They don't get the same access than others. So go there as hiring manager, as recruiter, expand your network and go to where they need also to get this access.
I'm sure. Yeah, and referring back to Toby's, it's obviously a similar question. But yeah, as you said, thinking about the whole process, and as you said, obviously Jesse as well as Toby, mapping it out for sure. And a question we've got from Jane is how big a piece do the panel feel that training can influence better social attitudes within the workplace? I think we have had some similar answers as again, but just to sort of reopen that one again for anybody else.
So I think training is important in any workplace. It's always important to have personal and professional development. But when you're doing training, particularly around diversity, inclusion, disability, things like that, you need to be really, really clear on what your expected outcomes are. For instance, I run unconscious bias training, and halfway through the training, I tell the participants that unconscious bias training doesn't work, because spending 2 hours with me in a training session is not going to undo years of bias that you've developed through the way that your brain is wired or through the impact of social conditioning. So when you design training, you have to be very clear about the outcome that you want. Training doesn't always, or won't change behaviors, for example. You need to go beyond training. You need to think about things systemically. So, what biases are existing in your talent management process, for example, that might be holding disabled people back in your organization? What biases exist within the recruitment process that might prevent disabled people getting through to a job offer? And it's looking at things systemically, which I think is more important.
For sure.
I like that. It's also something where we are in fact in the middle of a conversation like that at Ecosia on the tech lead role. How instead of setting up our expectation, what are preventing people to grow in that role? And obviously this conversation came from employees themselves, and we need to learn from that how we can make it better for making it accessible for other. There were some questions, for example, if you work part-time and can be for health reasons or for personal reasons or for any type of reason, some roles are not accessible. So what should you change also in your role definition to make it accessible for more diverse people? Because more, in my opinion, a company should reflect the world in which we are, especially if you want to sell products to the world, you need to be able to embed inside what the world is outside. Otherwise, you're just showing a small part version of what is existing. So you're not really accessing what you were saying, George, earlier on the number of money, which is not put there. So that's a question that should also be asked inside the company. That's why D&I, in my opinion, is important. If we want to sell to everyone and to touch everyone, we need to make sure that at every level of decision, we have people who can represent the world, and having them also define what is preventing them to reach that level is something that companies should be doing as well.
For sure, definitely. And yeah, some good points raised. And we have a question here from Craig. He said, I work with a range of young learners with different disabilities, and one of the biggest barriers they face is their own lack of self-belief and aspirations. So how can you better inspire these young people to want to work in the workplaces and in high-level roles, as you discussed earlier, Jesse?
It's a tough one. I mean, I can take a stab at it. I think this is management, right? This is building confidence, testing one's limits, giving a space to succeed or even fail, and give the power to know that even if they fail, they will succeed eventually, and letting them know that it's okay. And I think this is just magnified with the multitude of unconscious biases and imposter syndromes that are out there. I think that being in a position of influence or coaching or management, it's our duty to create that space for our people.
Yeah, if I could just add to that as well, we explicitly acknowledge that for our students, we introduce them to the concept of imposter syndrome almost on day one. It exists. It's okay. You'll feel it almost right until the end, and maybe even beyond. And naming it halves it. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay. Just reassurance. Yeah.
Another point. So Craig is saying also how we can better inspire these young people to want to work in our workplace. Yeah. We talk a lot about leading by example and also being authentic. I truly believe in that. And one of the thing I would advise, we talked also about invisible disabilities. So maybe there are people who are in higher position who are disabled, but it's not known. Personally, I try to be very open about all the issues I have, mental health issues, sickness issues, etc. Because I think if they see that people in higher position are open and are still in this higher position, it might help them also to realize that they can thrive in those companies because, well, a person in a management position thrived in this company. So they can as well. And it also means that the company is willing to put the effort to adapt to them. So I think there is definitely something from them that we need to work on, but there is also something from us that we need to work on. And I truly believe in representation. I do believe representation matters. we saw that in so many examples that I won't go into that. But I think that if we are also honest and open about that in our level, this will also help inspire people.
For sure, for sure. And I've got a question here as well from gentleman Stephen. And he said, with many classifications of disability, addressing the issues of some will inevitably sort of conflict with addressing others. And can we address all issues when designing apps and web apps, etc.?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting dilemma. If you try to make your website or app accessible by going through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.1 AA or something like that, you will probably end up with, clashes. And I think that's why it's particularly important to focus more on the user experience. So you get some actual real users with various disabilities and impairments using your website or your app to try and complete a particular journey or complete a particular task or achieve a particular goal. So, whether that's purchasing something and going through the checkout process, it's hugely eye-opening. And you sometimes have to do some payoffs. You have to make some hard decisions about developing a particular feature that might not be perfect for somebody over another user.
Yeah, and yeah, as you said, Toby, it's a good question, and certainly something that I think all apps would love to be inclusive of absolutely every single person. But it can often be as you said, a tricky feat. But I'm just going to wrap things up here, folks, because we are at 7 o'clock. Time does fly when you're having fun, as they say. And so thank you all so much for sharing your morning, evening, or lunchtime with us. And thank you again to our just fantastic panel of speakers. You've made it a really enjoyable evening for myself, and I've really loved being here as well. But we hope you can join us for our next webinar. We have a closing poll as well for as we're sort of making our way, hopefully, into our next networking event. There is a networking link within the chat function. And so I'd love to see as many people on there as possible, and get some minutes, hopefully, with a few of our panelists if they can join us. I'll be on there for the next 20 to 30 minutes as well to talk about what we've been discussing. But yeah, that is in the chat. That'll be again via Zoom from 7 till 7:30. And yeah, just thank you all again. And there is a short survey as you leave the room. If you please spend a couple of minutes on that, that'd be greatly appreciated, and give us some feedback for our next one. But yeah, stay tuned. You can find all of our contact details on the socials, and I'm sure of the meeting invites you found as well. But yeah, just want to say thanks again to the great panel. It's been great to have you, and great to meet you all.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely. No worries. Thanks guys. See you on the networking.
Okay.